So our second session will start with Marco Lanzagorta from ITT speaking on kinematic noise.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank the organizers of this workshop for the invitation. It's always very nice to be back in my dear alma mater. I'm from ITT Corporation. I'm based on the DC metro area. So for all intents and purposes, along with Kim Martin, Tanner, and Johnny, I'm part of the so-called DC Mafia. The topic, it was actually suggested by Kim Martin a few months ago. His question was, what is the effect of relative motion on the capacity of quantum channels? In particular, the type of quantum channels that we have been working on for a time. Kinematic noise is basically just the concept of motion as a form of noise in quantum communications. What I will do today is show you some results of analyzing two quantum channels, basically a stenographic transmission of classical information, just the send and receive channel, and also for quantum teleportation. This was actually also a direct follow-up to some of our results that we had in 2009. And back then we found that the degree of entanglement and the capacity of the teleportation channel, when you use imperfectly entangled states, they don't move in the same direction in the domain. So we study the quantum teleportation using domain theory. In the present talk, I will assume inertial frames and massive spin 1.5 particles. That is just like electrons, for example. But similar conclusions follow for spin 1 massless particles such as photons. So this is the outline of my talk. A very brief introduction to relativistic quantum information. Then I will treat the case of a send and receive quantum channel, then the teleportation channel, and then I will conclude. Let's suppose that we have Alice and Bob in these frames, right? Alice is moving with respect to Bob on the x-axis with some speed bx, and then at some point Alice decides to send Bob a qubit with some speed bc. The state that Bob receives, he will have to perform a Lorentz transformation. In what follows, I will concentrate on momentum helicity eigenstates. So Alice will choose one of those states with the helicity plus or the helicity minus, and it will send that state to Bob. And Bob will have to perform a Lorentz transformation. The unitary transformation for this Lorentz transformation, it was derived by Alcin and Milgrom, among others, back in 2002. And it's very simple. If you transform a state with certain momentum Pc and helicity plus, what happens is that the momentum of the states changes to the boosted momentum, but there is also a rotation in the helicity state. So here you can see that momentum Pc, and it goes to a state with momentum boosted, but then you also have a rotation that mixes the plus and the minus. It's important to note, last time I gave this presentation there was some confusion about this, that I will be talking about momentum helicity eigenstates only. And in this case, the Lorentz transformation will lead to separable states. So you can see that the transformation, for example, of the plus, it's something that depends just on the momentum, the boosted momentum, and then a term that depends on the helicity degrees of freedom, rotated, right? Let me mention that if we consider the case where you are not on a momentum eigenstate, so you don't have a definite momentum state like this, 50% on one or the other, and you apply the Lorentz transformation, what you obtain is this state here, which actually is mixing the degrees of freedom. So it's basically entangling the momentum degrees of freedom with the helicity degrees of freedom. And this is a result obtained also by some other people. So it's my point is to make emphasis that I will not be talking about these cases, just the momentum eigenstates. So there is no mixing like this explicitly of the equations. However, you can very easily generalize the results that we have to this type of case, and then you just have to trace out the momentum degrees of freedom and work with density matrices for the spin degrees of freedom, because ultimately what you do is you're using the helicity degrees of freedom to encode information. After some algebra, you can show that the tangent of the angle of the rotation in the helicity states is given by this expression over here. And you can see that this angle of rotation of the helicity states is different from zero only when both speeds are different from zero. And then in the case where both of them they are the same, just to give an idea of how this is the case, tangent omega is given by this expression over here. Let us consider very briefly the limiting cases for this eigenstate of momentum and helicity. In the non-relativistic limit, both of the speeds in the problem, they are much smaller than the speed of light, so the tangent of the angle is about zero, so the angle is about zero. And this basically means that the state as seen by Bob in this non-relativistic limit, it's basically the state set by Alice, state set by Alice, but it just, there is a change on the boost, on the momentum, on the value of the momentum. On the other hand, if you are working in the ultra-relativistic limit, when the speed of relevance is very close to the speed of light, then the tangent of the angle it just blows out to infinity, which means that the angle is about pi halves. So it means that if Alice sends a state with plus, Bob will receive a state where he has to correct with the boost on the momentum, and then it went from plus to an even superposition of plus and minus. Okay, now the first case of interest is a very simple steganographic channel. Here, Alice and Bob, they will encode classical information using these states 0 and 1. So this tilde 0 and tilde 1, they are like 0 logical and 1 logical. And it's just, they are using basically a different basis to represent the 0 logical and 1 logical. So Alice has this, and then sends these qubits to Bob, and Bob has to apply Lorentz transformation to these guys. It can be shown that this is down to a binary symmetric channel. So the probability that Alice sends a 0 and Bob receives a 0 is the same to the probability that Alice sends a 1 and Bob receives a 1, and we will call this P. And then the probability of error is the same for both cases. And the capacity of the channel is just given by this expression here, as it's usually done. Okay. For simplicity, let us define A as the cosine of omega halves and B as the sine of omega halves. And then we can write the Lorentz transformation as this matrix A, B minus B. And then if you work out what's the probability of success and what's the probability of error, you find that the probability of success is A squared plus 4B squared delta squared. And the probability of error is just 1 minus P. And it's given by this. And we're using the normalization condition that A squared plus B squared is equal to 1. And here delta, I have defined it as the imaginary part of alpha conjugate and beta, where these parameters, if you remember, they are the ones used to define the basis for the encoding of the information, right? So the first conclusion that we arrive from these equations is that the kinematic error, epsilon, depends on both, not only the kinematics of the problem, but also on the basis used for the communication protocol. So for simplicity, let's suppose that alpha and beta, they are real numbers. Then the kinematic error, this delta is basically 0. The kinematic error is basically B squared, and it can be written as this, where we would have supposed that, for simplicity, that all the speeds are the same. So in this case, we have two limiting cases. The non-relativistic case, the kinematic error is almost zero, so the capacity is almost 1. And in the ultra-relativistic limit, the kinematic error is 1/2, and then the capacity just goes down to 0. This is the behavior of the kinematic error for this case, where alpha and beta are real numbers. And you have this type of steep exponential behavior typical of relativistic problems. So you can see that kinematic error is actually very, very small. Let's suppose that the speed in which Alice is moving is 100 times the speed of sound, which is mighty fast. Then the kinematic error is 10 to the minus 17. So it's very, very small, but nevertheless interesting for theoretical purposes. Anyway, something important to note is that because the kinematic error depends on both on the dynamics and also on the basis used to send the information, is that there are fixed points. That is, if I choose delta as plus or minus half, then the kinematic error will be 0 always. So this means that if you use this basis to encode your 0 logical and your 1 logical, you will have perfect capacity regardless of the kinematic state, or of the kinematic values, right? This fixed point, if you think about it, it's a consequence that these states, they are actually eigenstates of sigma y. And if you remember the boosts, they were performed on the x and on the z direction. So, and if you remember from classical, well, not classical, but traditional relativity theory, everything that is orthogonal to the directions of motion, it doesn't get affected by the boost. So in this case, both boosts are orthogonal to y, so it's, you could have thought from the very beginning that something that is related to y will remain invariant, as such is the case. Another way to see why it's happening is that if you take the Lorentz transformation and then you look for the eigenvectors and eigenvalues of the Lorentz transformation, you get the eigenvalues are given by a plus minus ib, and they have this very nice normalization to 1. So when you apply the Lorentz transformation to these eigenvectors, this eigenvalue stays here, right? But it doesn't count when you are doing this counting of probabilities for capacity calculations, because the square is always 1. So the kinematic error, it always gets reduced to 0. Okay, now let me talk about the teleportation channel. This is based on some work that I did with Kim Martin last year. So it's the same idea. Alice and Bob, they will use 0 logicals and 1 logicals in some basis to represent classical information, right? And then they will have access to, in general, to imperfectly entangled state, right? We're considering the general case where the generation of this entangled state has noise, and then you have these other terms, right? So not necessarily a Bell state, but a very general case like this. Well, under these circumstances, you can show that the probability of success is given by this expression over here. So it depends on the coefficients of the entangled state and also on the basis used to represent the information, right? Now, the amount of entanglement is given by the Shannon entropy of the Schmidt coefficients here, and the Schmidt coefficients are given by this formula. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm just considering the case of momentum spin eigenstate, but it's worth to mentioning what happens in the case of teleportation if you are working with two particles that they don't have a definite state of momentum. That is, like I showed before, if they have something like 1 over square root of 2 q1 plus q2. So let's suppose that you have that type of particle where you have a spread in the momentum, and let's suppose that Lorentz are entangled only in the helicity degrees of freedom, right? Something very cool that happens is that when you apply a non-trivial Lorentz boost, the result is a state that will have some entanglement in the helicity states, but it will also have some entanglement on the momentum degrees of freedom. And of course, you can show that the total amount of entanglement of helicity plus momentum is a Lorentz invariant. However, if the particles are in momentum eigenstates, as in the cases that I'm taking into account, then they are just affected by a Lorentz transformation as I described before, and this transference of entanglement doesn't happen. Okay, so let's consider the following case where Charlie is traveling with Alice on the space shuttle, and Charlie is the source of entangled particles, right? So he needs to give one to Alice and then he needs to send one to Bob, so Alice and Bob can perform the teleportation, right? So this is the state generated in the frame of Alice, but when Bob has access to the one here, he has to perform a Lorentz transformation. So on the eyes of Bob, he will not look at a perfectly entangled state anymore, in the sense that he will not look at this type of Bell state, but he will be looking at this type of state, where A and B are the sine and cosines of the angle, right? From here you can show that the amount of entanglement of the original state is exactly the same as the amount of entanglement as the Lorentz corrected state. This means that in this specific case, the amount of entanglement is a Lorentz invariant. From here you could wrongly led to believe that the capacity of the teleportation channel is also invariant, but that is not the case. The capacity of the teleportation is not an invariant, and it actually has this error that depends on B squared. And this goes back to the same result to a similar result that I brought with Key, that shows that the degree of entanglement and the capacity of the teleportation channel, they do not move always in the same direction. So, and this is an example when this is happening. The other interesting thing is that the kinematic noise, it doesn't depend on the basis as it did for the previous example. This means that in this instance of relativistic teleportation, you cannot have a fixed point, because you cannot, the basis, they just don't appear there, right? And we have two limiting cases. The non-relativistic case, the capacity is 1, and in the ultra-relativistic case, the capacity is obliterated to 0. Okay, so even though you don't have fixed points, you can start thinking about some other things that you could try to do to reduce the kinematic error. For example, you could think to use this type of Lorentz invariant basis that we talked about last time, where they are invariant, right? And use these states, bar 0 and bar 1, to generate your entangled state. Well, in that case, when Bob performs the relativistic correction, he will look at the state that looks like this, right? And from here you can calculate that the kinematic error is given by 2b squared and then the absolute value of alpha squared and beta squared. If you are in the non-relativistic limit, then this is almost 0, so the kinematic error is almost 0, the capacity is almost 1. But if you are in the ultra-relativistic limit, the kinematic error goes as alpha squared beta squared. Now in this case, you could think of a strategy to reduce this type of kinematic noise, right? Because if you move the basis that you use to represent 0, 1, 0 logical and 1 logical towards a computational basis of 0, 1, then basically what you are doing is reducing the pair alpha beta to 1, 0, which would bring the kinematic error to 0. That means that it could be like a fixed point, but only on the limit when these two guys go to 1, 0, which may or may not be useful for the type of application that we have in mind. Another thing that they can try to do is to try to use imperfectly entangled state to see if they can somehow reduce the kinematic noise, right? So what they use is a state like this. It's not a Bell state, but there is some parameter k00 and k11, right? Well, in this case, you can compute the kinematic error, and it's given by this expression over here. Now, all these are inside this absolute value, so all this is greater or equal than 0, and a squared is greater than b squared in this regime. So this means that the kinematic error will always be greater or equal than b squared for all your choices of alpha, beta, and the entanglement parameters. So this means that in the ultra-relativistic limit, the capacity is 0 regardless of what type of basis you use or what type of states you use. Now this is an interesting result because, in general, when you have a quantum state transformation, you usually are required to use a completely positive map, right, expressed by this Gauss decomposition. However, a student of mine, James McCracken, is also being co-supervised by Kim Martin. He noted that if we consider the absence of fixed points in this type of example of relativistic teleportation, and based on a theorem that Kim Martin wrote some time ago, then we're left with the conclusion that the relativistic channel is not a completely positive map. And this looks like sort of weird, but then if you think about it, the reason behind this result is the fact that the Lorentz transformation is acting on 2 degrees of freedom, the momentum and the helicity, right? But when you are doing information protocols and all that, you only take into account the helicity, degrees of freedom to encode information, and then you just trace out the momentum states. And this is an alternative and looks like much simpler derivation of a similar result that was derived by Perez and Terno back in 2003. So to conclude, motion can be considered as a form of noise, which I think is a very cool thing. However, of course, like in most relativistic problems, kinematic noise is very, very small outside the ultra-relativistic regime. We show that this is certainly the case for stenographic, send and receive, and teleportation channels for the specific inertial framework that we have been discussing. We show that, well, it's easy to show that there are fixed points on the send and receive channel. This does not exist for the teleportation channel. And as a consequence, in general, the relativistic transformation is not a completely positive map. Current and future work, we're working together on extending these ideas into non-inertial frames, putting gravitational fields, and the same idea, what's the capacity of these quantum channels in presence of gravity. This should be useful to determine what are the effects of a gravitational field on quantum communications when it's established through the use of space satellites. These are some reference, and that's it. So, questions or comments?
I don't quite see how this is different from, let's say, sending any kind of a material particle, and then Alice is just looking the other way, right? So she'll have to perform a rotation so that she properly receives the information. So, and also the capacities are usually defined as something which is already optimized over decodings, whereas you seem to just take the direct, sort of the most silly encoding that they can do. Like helicity states don't mean anything special to Alice, so it could be any basis that she uses to decode. And then this phenomenon seems to vanish.
Oh, it's just a type of protocol that we're considering, so of course.
Yes. So they're just stupid. They're just stupid. They don't make a correction. That's the idea.
Alice and Bob.
If they don't know the kinematic state of the other person, then they
No, I'm not saying they're stupid. I'm saying Alice and Bob is the product.
If they have no access to the kinematic state yet.
So I agree with Reinhard. Alice, who receives, can always undo the unitary. The case where you could have noise is if you claim that Alice and Bob fail to know the velocity, their relative velocity.
That's
But
what I
then the nature of the noise would be slightly different from what you described, because you didn't average over that velocity parameter. So if I said, here's the prior over their velocity, then you could say, right, there is a noise, and it's given by a particular CP map, which has that prior in it, and the particular unitaries. But if they know the velocity, then Alice should just undo the unitary.
Yeah, this is on the case that they don't know what's the kinematic state of the other part.
You're saying that's not the case, that they don't know?
They don't know.
But then you should tell me what their knowledge is and average over that. Is it a uniform prior over all velocities?
Yeah, it's just a case where there is no information about how this thing is being prepared or how, because even on the state of the imperfectly entangled state, right? If you know how imperfectly it's being prepared, then you can always devise a teleportation protocol that will take into account any type of imperfectly entangled state that you start with. But we were proposing that there is no knowledge as to how these things are being prepared.
So you mentioned that the total entanglement is invariant.
That what?
The total entanglement is
Uh-huh.
an invariant, you mentioned. So how do you quantify it when the continuous variable of the momentum is involved? Because we have so many methods of entanglement.
Yeah, that work was done by these guys, and they used concurrency metrics.
So it's related to what measure of entanglement we choose, or is it? Because an entanglement measure for continuous variable is not really well defined yet. No?
Yeah, they use concurrency to show this.
That's qubits.
Hmm?
That's qubits. Concurrency is qubits. So don't look at the other end.
No, so the entanglement considered both momentum and qubits. No.
They don't do it.
Okay.
Is there one more question? Or